Hey, it's Fayd. This is just a flowchart thing that I made to help you decide like what cells to use, I guess. It's pretty basic. It's not always going to be right, but a lot of people were asking me like, what build do I do? And ever since the Rage Hunter exploit stuff was fixed, that's a pretty detailed question, honestly. Depends on what you're doing, depends on how good you are, depends on, what your goal is basically for a fight. So, a couple things to go over first. Basically, everything you need to use this chart is actually written on the sides, okay? So if you don't know what any of it means, look over here, it's there. Next, if Shroud, Chainblade, or Pike, use +3 Cunning Cell in a weapon slot. If no, +3 Cunning, use something else. So if you have a +2 Cunning, don't use it. Use something else instead. Unless that's all you have, that's fine, but it'd be better to use Evasive Fury or Wild Frenzy probably. Just because +3 Cunning makes it +6 with a Shroud weapon, and that's a 10% damage buff versus a 7% with a +5. So it's a ridiculous increase. And 10% multiplicative, by the way, which I'm not going to get into right now, but a multiplicative damage buff, if you already have some additive damage, is a big deal, but multiplicative by itself, not so good. So, yeah. Anyway, these are the things that have an exploitable Aether mode. As far as I'm aware, I just did it on the fly. I could have missed something. And these are the things that have an exploitable Boop. Again, I could have missed something, but I just wrote this up real quick. So I'm going to be making a full meta video at some point. It's just, this is a holdover, okay? And these benefit from attack speed, again. Some situations, axes and hammers might, but generally speaking, these weapons will. Now, mobility slots almost always good. Use conditioning. Again, the better you are, the less important this is. But even the best players with certain weapons will use conditioning on one piece of gear. So, basically what you do is you follow the questions and follow the arrows. Yeses are on the left, no's are on the right. That's how it is on everything, okay? And when it says your choice of cell, that literally means just pick something from up here, from above, okay? Or a utility cell of some sort. It doesn't mean that nothing good can be put there. It just means that there's a negligible benefit, all right, from one over the other at that point. Now, when you get to, let's say, exploitable Aether mode, no, Rage Hunter. This doesn't mean get +6 Rage Hunter. This means get as much Rage Hunter as you can easily get. Meaning, if you have Rage Tail gloves and you have like a +2 Rage Hunter, stick it on them, put the gloves on. That's +4 Rage Hunter right there. You don't need to go do to put it in another piece of gear if you're not already using it, like if that makes sense. So that's your Rage Hunter finished, so to speak. Then does it have an exploitable Boop? If it does, then use Overpower, let's say. And again, you can put a couple +2 overpowers in your gear, or a +3 overpower, and that's it. You don't have to get to +6 here. It's just saying try to get overpower, because the more of these Rage Hunter, Overpower, Rage types, or Aether Hunter cells that you have, the more useful cells like Evasive Fury and Wild Frenzy are, and the more attack speed's going to benefit you, and the more powerful Cunning becomes. Because Cunning is more powerful if your base damage is higher, or if your additive damage things, which are Aether Hunter, Rage Hunter, Overpower, and Savagery. If those additive damage buffs, or Shroud Weapon, if those additive damage buffs are, if there's multiple of them and they're high, then your Cunning is more powerful and your attack speed is better, okay? Because they're going to multiply that damage. So yeah, I'll do a couple quick examples. If you're doing Moonreaver, no, it doesn't have Aether. Okay, an exploitable Aether. It doesn't have any Aether actually, but no. So run some Rage Hunter. Exploitable Boop, it does run Overpower. Are you using a Shroud weapon? Let's say we're not, because honestly, Shroud weapon, if you're using a Shroud weapon, you're using the passive, okay? Otherwise, there's no point in it. It's useless if you're not using the passive. And arguably, you could say Chainblades and Pike are good without because of Cunning. But anyways, the passive is the primary reason to use a Shroud weapon. And the passive is if you're below 20% HP, you deal 50% more damage, which is on top of, all your other stuff. Anyway, so let's say you're not using a Shroud weapon, because in Moonreaver, you're just going to be booping it over and over again. You're not going to be low health that often unless you just let it hit you a ton, which is a strategy, but not for Moonreaver, in my opinion, unless you're trying to speedrun. Anyway, significant benefit from attack speed this time. Let's say you're using a pike. So, yes. Okay, then you probably want to run Evasive Fury. Then, is it a pike? Yes, it is. Then you want to run Savagery. And that's your build right there. Your Rage Hunter, Evasive Fury, and Savagery. And notice that there's very few ways you can do this that you end up having 4 suggested cells. In fact, the only way you can do that is if you're either Aether Hunter or Rage Hunter and then into Overpower, which is basically in any build. These 2 of these 3 are pretty much going to be in any build you run, in my opinion. So if you're doing that and then into Shroud Weapon, yes, then you run Rage and Wild Frenzy. So, and then you might even have Cunning on top of that. So that's like 5 different types of damage cells that you're using. And if you need to, you can substitute things for that. You don't need to have all 5 of these, even at +3 or something. It's literally just saying, if by some, I guess, as a result of your build, if you have a lot of Aether Hunter and Rage Hunter, or Aether Hunter, I should say, already, and you have like a +6 overpower, and you're using Shroud Armor, so you have some Rage, and then you've got, Wild Frenzy slotted in somewhere anyways, or just because you have Chain Blades and it's a good sell for them, then good for you, right? But it's not saying you have to get +6 on these, because you still need a mobility slot, in my opinion. In my opinion, most of the time. So, actually, I need to fix this. The only mistake on this, and actually, in my personal opinion, I don't know if it's a mistake necessarily. But if you're using a Shroud weapon, if it's a Shroud Pike, it's not going to take you to Savagery. So, I'm not sure I would ever suggest using Savagery on a Shroud Pike. I'd have to think about that, because Wild Frenzy and Rage are so powerful. And the 50% damage bonus from the Shroud Pike itself is very powerful. And on top of that, you're getting these other cells. So if you were going to use it, you would take out one of the first 2. And I'm not sure it's worth it to do that. Or you could take out Overpower instead. But these are just such large damage bonuses that synergize so well with Pike to begin with, where, when you're talking about Overpower because of booping, etc., etc. With a Shroud Pike, I'm just not sure that I would run Savagery. But, in fact, I think I've used the Shroud Pike and I didn't run Savagery. But anyways, I hope this was helpful. I'll definitely have a more in-depth thing regarding this later. I'm not sure, again, about the Savagery with the Shroud Pike. It's just, I guess, a personal thing, but whatever. Just keep in mind that you could do it. So, yep, peace out.